Welcome to the Moms I Know with Sheila Walsh-Denton and Maria Anderson-Farner. Two moms on a mission to reclaim childhood and take you from surviving to thriving on your parenting journey. The Moms I Know is your go-to source for motivation, inspiration, and resources, and real conversation about motherhood and parenting with intention. Thank you for being a part of our community. We hope you enjoyed this episode.
Opportunities for both academic and character growth cannot be discounted simply because your homeschool looks less and less like a public school.
Welcome to the Moms I Know. What a wonderful quote. Who said that?
It's anonymous.
So today we wanted to talk about this idea of a day in the life of a family schooler. And we have been getting so many questions and calls and having conversations with parents who are trying to figure out this new shift from sending their children to school to bringing their children home or keeping their children home and, moving on into new adventures with education. So Sheila, I really appreciate that quote. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about this idea of changing our paradigm around what homeschooling or family schooling can look like when parents are so used to sending their children to a classroom, to another teacher to teach them what people think they should know.
Yeah, and there's layers to this. There's layers because what I am interested in is what the teachers are thinking, in the sense of they are, I don't say directing the ship, but they are captaining the ship. And so what they need to know is that it's impossible to recreate the classroom at home because everybody has different resources at home. And that's part of this conversation as well, is talking about the equity and everything. And so we definitely want to bring that up. However, I do believe that what we can do is if we can have our teachers know that it's not going to be the classroom, but to tap into what people have, to tap into their passions and really be able to give it, as we always say, Maria, is that space and grace. Be forgiving and know that life happens because we are living through a pandemic right now. Things are changing every week. Businesses are being closed. I mean, we don't know if the teachers' partners' livelihood is no longer there or the families in the classroom livelihood's no longer there, the stress. And so what we're trying to say is that homeschooling lets life be lived. And it's going to be a different rhythm, but how do we leave space for that? And I think both you and I, with our homeschool backgrounds, doing it for many years, know that life happens and we work around this. But there's some constants going on. And that's where the tenets of family school, I think, really can resonate and can really help provide a framework for this time as we move forward.
You've touched on so many key issues there already. This idea of rhythm, the idea of, not recreating the classroom at home, this idea of equity, change, uncertainty, not knowing what everybody is going through. And so there are so many pieces here that need to be unpacked. And again, you also spoke to that we've been doing it for years. And so we've been seeing that it's a completely different paradigm. And some of our listeners are people that have homeschooled their kids for years. Some are, have had their kids in public or private school. We've got the whole gamut. And so now we're looking at this. Okay, do we continue homeschooling because, it's been working so beautifully, or are we now looking at homeschooling because our children's school is closed or we're concerned about sending our children back? And so there's so many layers here. So, I really think we can unpack this idea of rhythm and certainly the equity piece is just huge because I've been talking to so many parents who are, basically sort of upper middle class, but are saying that the distance learning didn't work for them at all. And then I've also been talking with families where, the equity piece has just never been equitable because the computer aspect or the background knowledge, it's a huge piece. In our interview with Lisa Dominguez Abraham, where she really addressed that piece, and the studies are really showing that. But every single mom that I've talked to where the kids were doing this distance learning has said it wasn't working. And so now, we have to try to help the teachers understand this, the parents whose kids have been in school understand this, and then for the families that have been homeschooling to help them share with their friends and their communities. I was talking with this one mom the other day who I said, you're going to be such a resource for your friends and your community because you have this way of looking at things like that education is everywhere. And so we just want to reassure all of you that this can work beautifully and it is an unknown. And so I think if we go into a little bit of the tenets of family school and then also give a couple of ideas of, we can do a few illustrations of that day in the life.
And I want to touch on something you just said is that it's not working, because I heard that too. The distance learning is not working. However, that's the plan right now. They're planning to go back and let it go again. And I think that's where we need to talk with our teachers, and we need to let them know that, and also let parents know that in addition, so that big and, in addition to distance learning that you maybe do 2 hours a day, that you can bring in some other amazing learning opportunities. And that's where family school becomes part of this equation, where really what we have talked about in family school can really fill in those blanks and make learning fun and develop passion and really be a remarkable time to build family culture at this moment. So looking at family school, let's start off with the first tenet, which is guardians of childhood.
So with that, and I think that's, this idea of protecting childhood as this time that children should be, very young children should be playing. They don't need to be on screens. They don't need to be sitting at a desk. They don't need to be having every moment structured so carefully. And so with guardians of childhood, we're really looking at making sure that children are having appropriate developmental play, that they are having time in nature, that we are just letting them be children again. And I think we've been seeing this over the past couple of decades, that the pace of life has sped up so much. And what I'm really seeing people enjoying now is that things have slowed down. And even though there is this level of uncertainty and stress, people are really saying there's been something that's been really nice about this slowdown. And now as we go into this new paradigm, we can really look at what's developmentally appropriate for your children. And if you still have to do that distance learning or, the Zoom classroom or whatever, that, and like I said, so many parents are saying that's not working for their kids. They don't want their kids on the screen. The kids themselves are saying, this is not what we want. That if you still have to be doing some of that, that then the rest of the time can be much more open-ended and play-based and creative and fun. And so I think that's what we're really talking about here with this Guardians of Childhood piece.
Exactly. And I also want to just do a shout out for my webinar. I have a webinar that is about how to set up a homeschool environment. And what that basically means is setting up your home for curiosity. And these are things that you've told me and things I've learned from my years of homeschooling is really, making the learning accessible, making sure you have crafting supplies, making sure you have access to nature. You have things outside that are inviting and everything, so that if you have to get some work done, you're like, oh, your kids, even preschool kids, can play while while you are there. But they're able to do some self-independent play. I think that's been really hard on parents, of just trying to find the balance, of trying to quote unquote entertain, teach, provide for their children, but yet they have full-time jobs. So how do we do that? And part of that is setting up your home for learning, as well as protecting childhood, not rushing, not forcing, just letting it be, just breathing through this.
And when children have that opportunity to just have open-ended creative play, they usually, after a period of time where they get used to this, they do entertain themselves for hours. And if there's siblings in the house, they can usually play together. And so when things are a struggle, that means that we have to look at the environment, like you said. So I really appreciate you bringing that up. And it can take a while. It's this period of sort of like deschooling, or, when the siblings come home from school and there's squabbling for a while. but usually they work through that and then they find these ideas for cooperative play. And nature is usually the best place for all of that, because then they're not fighting over objects, but they're out in a more open-ended. But again, there's so many items in the household that you can create that open-ended play. So yes, so guardians of childhood, protecting childhood and protecting that free play.
Yeah, and that flows into time and space, which is really, this is what we have right now. We have time and space. Like, recognize that, what a gift that could be. And that's the paradigm shift. That's the refocus. This is not a race. There's space to do this. There's space to do these things, that maybe pick up an instrument, maybe, and that, again, this is like, if you have opportunities, but then it's also space to cultivate new relationships if we can. And sometimes maybe that might have to be online. I think there's going to be some, differences that we have to deal with because of the pandemic. But again, what is important, and keeping this family school, like, kind of as the overarching umbrella to build strong family culture and everything. How are we doing that?
And I think with time and space, even with a pandemic, I'm seeing so many families, creating their, sort of an extended family pod, and then doing lots of outside activity. And I think people are starting to feel a little more comfortable with that, although things are changing every day. But this idea of, how can we have this group time, but also have it be outdoors and have it be more open-ended. And it again, you talked about this, it's a paradigm shift. And so many people are at a loss as to what to do with this. And yet, if we can just go back, even 50 years, things were so much slower in terms of our daily rhythm. And so I think that what we're getting here is this window into the way things can be, this opportunity to shift our busy, busy lives and just appreciate everything so much more.
And I just want to touch on the place of people thinking that their children are falling behind, that, they're not going to be at grade levels, that sort of concern of like, we're wasting this time or something like that. And again, that shift of, this is not wasting time. Everything, invest in this time, and you are responsible for changing this. So, creating situations that are, that where learning happens. I mean, Maria and I, we see learning every day throughout the day. And those are things that as you start to do this, you make that happen. And just know that what you're doing really is the space to enjoy the process of learning. That's really what we want to do here. And so, yeah, your child might not know certain skills in math and everything, but yet they're going to be picking up something else. And then they'll be able to apply that confidence to that harder math problem next semester or something like that.
Beautifully said. I think that what we will be learning in these next months and year to come, it's going to be so much more valuable. And I think that our children are going to be so much stronger because of this shift in paradigm. Well, so it's an exciting time.
Yeah, and it was like the quote that we opened up with, like the market character and everything, and resilience, which, goes right into our third tenet of family school, which is courage cultivation. It's how do we build resilience through tough times? How do we do things? And we're at this place where there's opportunities to maybe go on travel trips, or there's opportunities to do things with a little bit more space that you would not normally get to do.
We're also really looking at, this is such a challenging time, physically, emotionally, when we look at what's happening here in our country. This is an opportunity for kids to really look within, especially, those slightly older children, and we can be tackling some of these tough issues around equity, around climate change, around, just so many of the challenges that we're facing, the political scene, all of this. And so these are huge opportunities for learning that may not be as comfortable as we would like, but they are going to foster that deep character development and really looking at what matters in life and how we can help our children foster honesty, integrity, critical thinking skills, and also really deepen that, especially for the mid kids and the high school kids, this making sure that they are finding really good resources and that they are valid resources so that they are truly digging for the truth at all times.
That's something that teachers could be directing. Teachers can be leading some of these discussions about courage cultivation and then segue those into project-based learning about certain things.
Beautiful. So, when we first started talking about courage cultivation, we were talking about, risk taking, risk within safe boundaries taking and just
adventure.
Right.
Yeah.
And now here we are in one of the greatest adventures of our time. I mean, this pandemic is, we are making history right now. And so this is just an incredible time of cultivating that courage in all of us, adults and children.
And I want to say that, we're saying like courage cultivation for children, but this is also a time to reflect like on our own as a parent, digging deep. And I'm thinking of the parent who is conflicted because how is she going to get her child who plays video games all day to do something else, or or her child who does not want to go outside and play, or who does, somebody who's so set in their ways and doesn't know where to go. And I think that's the place where the parent has to practice as well. The parent has to figure out to pivot and provide opportunities. And so it's going to take a lot of work on everybody's part.
Which is really going to lead us into our next tenet, but I just wanted to address that for just a second in that, yes, it's not going to be easy, and yet it's this incredible opportunity. And we'll get into a few more specifics with some ideas of creating that rhythm. But here, leading into classic pastimes, here is an area where you can make that shift by bringing in these things. It's like, okay, we're in the midst of a pandemic. How did people used to do their daily life? How did people used to entertain themselves? What were the things that they were reading? What were the stories that they were telling? So when we talk about classic pastimes, we're talking about literature, we're talking about stories, we're talking about games, we're talking about activities that people have done for thousands of years or hundreds of years. And with this piece, a lot of times people hear classic and they think, Eurocentric, and we're not saying that. We're saying classic that has withstood the test of time within whatever culture you are in, whatever background you're coming from. And so helping you dive deep into your family history and pulling out things that your ancestors did. And we're also talking about, really good literature, really rich vocabulary and all of that.
Language.
Yes, the language.
And the games, just a deck of cards can, really be a fun pastime. I mean, we've been playing a ton of poker since COVID started, and we just, and gin, and we just are playing a ton of cards. So.
And we've been pulling out new, board games, and then also looking at different areas of the world and what they've been playing. And so it's really a great opportunity. So you were talking about that child who's hesitant to go outside, or the child who, their summer has been filled with video time. So this, as the parent, you get to say, look at this new way of being, and we're going to do some exploration into this, and we can bring these things in. And we're not saying no to all of the screen time. We're saying, let's use this time in different ways. And so while using it judiciously, and then bringing in all these things that are so much more wholesome for our whole family. And so that.
Yeah, it's again thinking, it's again the and piece, and this as well. It's like, okay, you need this, and let's do this. It's going to be a time. And, when we do our homeschool discussions, it's conversations. It's engagement. It's conversation. I mean, that's what we want more of.
And long leisurely meals. And that then leads us into this last piece of, rites of passage and celebrations. And I mean, right now we are in the midst of a rite of passage. I mean, this is the generation that, this is going to be the COVID-19 generation, and they will be talking about this, and it's shaping their lives. It's shaping all of our lives. And so, but we can also look at rites of passage, how do we now celebrate and honor these passages of time in different ways. And with, a dear family member just passed away. And so we're looking at how do we honor this lifetime when family can't get together, or the birthdays or the weddings or all of these kinds of things. How do we celebrate them? And so rites of passage, we have lots of great resources for you within that. But it's this mindset shift of how do we celebrate? How do we honor the passage of time? And it's going to be an incredible opportunity for looking at things a little bit differently, but also making sure that we are not overlooking this in our children's development.
Yeah, most definitely. I think honoring the passage of time is going to look different, but it's not to be ignored. So it's definitely. So that is family school, and we want you to try to think about incorporating some of those tenets into your everyday, into a rhythm that includes games, that includes balance, that includes the quote unquote andness, that your days can have that. But Maria and I, we often get asked the question, well, what does a day in the life look like a homeschooler? And this is not let's not talk about distance learning, because you could just fit that in wherever. But if we were to say a day in the life of a homeschooler, what in your, Maria, give an example. One that I'll give an example.
Okay. And I would encourage people to, if there is that, if you can't let go of this distance learning piece, just try to reframe it a little bit and then have those conversations. You said this at the beginning, Sheila. Have those conversations with your child's teacher and say, this much screen time isn't working for them. How can we do this in a way that is going to bring those same instructional goals forth, but in a more creative way? So, and this is going to look different for every single family. And this is also the part that really we encourage you to have your mentors as you go forth with family schooling, homeschooling, however your educational path is going to look this coming year, to have somebody who can really support you on this journey. Because, we had those people for us as we muddled our way along and found our paths. But for us, I didn't want to just recreate the classroom at home, but I also was the kind of person that had those shoulds at the back of my mind. So I wanted to make sure the kids were covering the things that they might be covering in the classroom if they were in that classroom. But we could do it in ways that were so much more relevant for the children. So for us, it was a slightly more leisurely morning. Sleep is so important for our children. So again, homeschooling allows us to make sure our children are getting that sleep. We're big on rhythm, and so really wanting to have that rhythm for our children. So, bedtime and, meal times, bedtimes, story times, sleep patterns, all of those rhythms that we can create. And so here we are at this time, kind of coming back towards the school year. It's a time when we naturally bring a bit more rhythm into the family life. So making sure that we have that general bedtime and that our children are getting the sleep they need, but not having to wake them up in the morning super early, letting them be on a more gentle schedule. Cooking breakfast together. There's so much you can bring in right there with measurement and with ratios. And so, you can make meal times a wonderful math lesson without even talking about it. We don't have to tell our children everything that we're doing as we're just living our lives. So bringing in some aspects of math or science or even language arts, social studies in the making of the breakfast. We were big on family reading, and so a lot of times in the morning after breakfast, it was just a time for stories, and we would bring in things that were relevant for them at their developmental stages, and then also kind of tying into the grade level expectations. Our children were late readers, and so we did a lot of reading together, so it was really a lot of language rich and reading readiness types of things. So that was kind of the late morning time. And then, breathing in and out. So then an outside time. We also had animals, so kids had chores that they had to take care of. And then kind of looking at things thematically, we would usually have general themes that we're going through, so that just before lunch, there would be some project-based learning. And then lunchtime was another opportunity for, again, looking at different types of learning. And then after lunch, having that outside time. And then the afternoons could be just adventures and more thematic learning, and also making sure that children have plenty of free play. So when you're recreating the classroom at home, well, you don't have to recreate it at home. You can be looking at what are the learning objectives and how do we bring these in creative and meaningful ways. But it's not going to take anywhere near as much time as it does in the classroom. So again, you're freed up to do much more open-ended types of activities, follow the children's interests, and making sure that they have that free time to follow their own paths, because that's when true learning happens. And as long as they're not just plugged into a screen, they're going to be learning. They're going to be creating. And when you've created a rich learning environment for your children, they will just be learning everywhere and within everything. Then again, late afternoon, when it's meal prep time, sometimes depending upon the ages of your children, you can have them help with that, or you can have them doing independent projects, or there can also be the outdoor play depending upon where you are. And so it's this idea of breathing in and breathing out. So more structured time with a more, outdoor open-ended time, and then coming back for some more focused learning and then out again. And so, that's one example. It's kind of how we lived our lives. And, we did bring in the state standards that they didn't always match for our children, just in terms of what was being learned at what time. And we also did, wide thematic learning. We were very Waldorf inspired. And so when we were homeschooling, we were looking at early on for the children, the fairy tales, the folk tales, the nature stories from different cultures, and then going on from there. And there's wonderful resources for Waldorf-inspired homeschooling out there. But Sheila, you also talked about like the athletes, the families where there are athletes, and so they might have a very different schedule where there's that early morning workout. So I'd love for you to go into that.
The rhythm that you described is very similar to our rhythm. Very. I think you help, kind of influence that of just the natural rhythm where my children would, we would read in the morning, we would stay in bed and read, and then the breakfast, and then the outside, and then like thematic learning, and really discovering, I think kind of by default, that the children, like we were following them, they were doing the learning, and they would find something under the log, under the rock, in the tide pool, and then that would be the area of study. And then we'd keep going back to the beach, keep going back to the forest, where it became a lesson, and then that's project-based learning. To the question about the athletes, what homeschooling allows for is that place where the athletes can go into their skill. They're able to hone their skill, where in the early morning, sometimes the athletes would take the 2 to 3 hours, 4 hours of athletic training, and then come home and then do a little of the schoolwork, and then go back for their afternoon for training. It's just, that's what homeschooling allows for. And maybe if you have a high schooler who's interning or something, or it's I'm seeing some things that there's some high schoolers who are getting into coding, or who are doing their thing, and they're actually making money. So again, it gives them that space to follow their passions. So it's putting structure. Dr. Schumann said this, and I just really kind of really have used this, is to put structure around what is important. And so whether that's parents' work that needs to be done, whether it's child's athletic training or distance learning, put the structure around that, and then create the flow and the rhythm using, and this is the kind of Maria and what we're saying is like using family school, keeping that in the back of your mind, that these things that you can bring in are these conversations you're having, these meals that you're cooking, that all these things are kind of going into this big family pot, and so you're adding all these things, and then you're going to be stirring it up. And what you're doing is you're creating family, you're creating family memories, you're strengthening family culture, and you're giving them something to hang on to once we get through this. And once that, they're going to remember this time. And that's what we want for our children, I think.
Beautiful. And then I do want to address, for the families that really feel they need much more structure. And, we've both worked with many families where they have a much more tight schedule for their children, and for themselves. So we've seen the families that get up super early and they do the chores and they do their workouts, and then they have breakfast together, and then it's 2 hours of structured work at the kitchen table. But around, there's lots of different curriculums out there and there are children who really like to, accomplish, I don't want to say workbooks, but that they really feel that internal need for that accomplishment.
They need that tangible.
Of the pages.
Yeah.
Right. And so, for some families that works beautifully. For ours, it did not. And so, when we've worked with lots of different styles of homeschooling. And so, for some families, it was that structured hour or so at the kitchen table with the kids or in a kind of a study area. And they would get these things accomplished, and we're going very standards-based or a more structured curriculum. Or even in a Waldorf inspired, with the creating the beautiful books for a little while every single morning. And then having that break time, that outside time, and then coming back for the meals. And then the afternoons would be the more open-ended, the field trips, the outings, or the more thematic study units. And so, there's lots of different ways that we can look at this, and it's going to depend upon the children's learning styles, their temperaments, the parents' objectives, all of that. And so a good educational consultant or a homeschool mentor can help you find your way as you're going along with this journey. And so, those are just 3 ideas in terms of kind of that rhythm of the day. But even within that much more structured family life where things are a bit more timed and the kids have this very precise schedule, there's still more room because it's not 30 kids in a classroom all of the same age. So even with that more structured type of life, there's more time and space within there for the family to have these excursions and outings and conversations and lengthier meal times. And so for families where they've been driving their kids to school and, the carpooling, the long drives, the afternoon activities, the different classes, this is this opportunity to breathe in a different way and to slow down. And even with that tighter structure, to allow more, as you've always said, that space and grace, and then giving your children that free time for them to really explore their own interests. Because out of boredom, creativity is born. And I think that we've seen in these last few decades that our children have less and less free time to just let their minds go. And that's what children need. And I think that's what the world needs right now. I think that we're really seeing that we are ready for a new paradigm globally. And so these children that are coming of age right now, they're going to be the ones that are going to be dreaming of all of the solutions that we need and all of the different ways that we can communicate as a human species. And so it's really exciting to see what is going to come from this global pause. So
I think I can add to that. The global pause, that's where we're at right now. And I just, Maria and I are going to continue this conversation. Maria, will you tell us what you have going for the fall? I saw that.
Right. So my 10-week program is going to be starting again, August 20th. And so just coming up soon. And so that's going to be really weekly support for parents where there will be open conversation. I do have my sort of 10 essentials of parenting that we will be going over. And, they're basically all within our family school tenets. And so that starts October 20th, and you can check that out at thefutureoffamily.com. And then Sheila, you have all kinds of things going on as well.
Yeah, I'm really trying to show up as a homeschool mentor. And so I've been offering webinars of how to set up your homeschool space, as well as webinars on project-based learning, workshops on project-based learning. And they are where taking the taking the standards, talking about goals and objectives, and then really trying to create, giving people the tools for the toolkit to facilitate learning at home in a way that is conducive to rhythm and routine and, respectful of children's different learning styles, etc. So I'm excited because I really think that this is what you and I know. And it's like, we want to share, we want to help you kind of, understand this and work with this. And, it is a process. It is a practice. You're constantly, trying new things out. Some things work, some things don't. And that's that's why homeschooling is life. That's why, it's really reflective of life. Some things work, some things don't.
You speak to that so beautifully. And also, for those of you that haven't checked out our homeschooling ebook, the homeschool guide, you can look that up at themomsiknow.com. And I think that's a really good starting place because it talks about the different styles. And so it's an overview in a little ebook that can really help you wrap your head around some of these concepts that we've been talking about. And then, of course, there's so much more support out there. So we just really encourage you to take this time, and we know it's stressful, but just know that it's going to be okay. And you and your children are going to find your path, and it's going to be an adventure that will have its ups and downs, but in the grand scheme of things, I think it's really going to be an exciting adventure. And we've certainly seen that within our own families and with the many, many families that we've worked with that have chosen this. So regardless of whether it's distance learning or homeschooling or family schooling or a combination of all of the above, it's all going to work out. So take care.
Sí se puede. Yes, we can. Yes, we can.
All right.
All right.
See you next time. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for joining us today for the Moms I Know. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. To get the show notes and resources mentioned in today's episode, visit themomsiknow.com. For information on Maria's programs, visit thefutureoffamily.com. And for information on Sheila's programs, visit purplebeetfamily.com. Don't forget to subscribe and rate us on iTunes and follow us on Instagram at the Moms I Know Podcast. Until next time, have a joyful family journey.